Today, I am going to be talking about the book by Galwan Karmapa, Interconnected, and I'm on the fourth chapter, which is titled Equality and Diversity. It begins on page 77 in my edition of the book, and he is talking about the century that we live in as opposed to the way things have been in the past. So in the present century, there is a much greater awareness of diversity, human diversity, and also commitment to equality. In the past, differences have been used to divide people, divide races, divide people according to the religion, according to sex or gender, gender identity, and so forth. And all of this has resulted in people being ranked in terms of various things, and it has led to a lot of inequality and led to people that are different or other people thinking that different people are impaired or they're even unnatural in some way or another, especially for people that identify with a gender that is different than their physical body and so forth. Or also impairment because of physical disability or mental disability. All of this is imputed by people. It's not natural to make these differences. It's inevitable that there are differences, that there is diversity. This is not to be looked at as making differences in terms of the equality of people or making some people better than others or some people worse than others. In his words, that all sentient beings are equal in our ability, our capacity to experience pain and experience happiness, to be joyful. And all human beings throughout history want to avoid suffering and they want to be happy. And this is much, much more to the nature of humans than it is the superficial differences that we all have. It's much more fundamental. Quote, all human beings are equal in our capacity to cultivate the inner conditions on which our happiness depends. As individuals and also as society, empathy, love, and a courageous compassion. So these are what our happiness depends on. And we're going to talk about these today: empathy, love, and a courageous compassion. And the book will go into these in much more detail and depth as we continue reading. So we all have this equal potential to be happy and this desire to be happy. We all depend on the earth, the water, the air, and the environment. We share the sky. And due to interdependence, these resources are not shared equally. He says that the Tibetans use the analogy to explain diversity as the roots and branches of a tree. That a tree is rooted in the earth, it brings its water and nutrients from the earth On the other hand, the branches take different forms. And these different forms are actually looked at as beneficial. If you know much about trees, the branches will take different shapes depending upon the position of the tree, and different trees will have different shaped branches. To go on, Karmapa says that when we live our lives as equals within interdependence, we're of course going to have different cultural assumptions, different religious views, different philosophies of life. And on the other hand, this diversity, he feels, nurtures the richness of human culture, that we have a lot of different resources at our fingertips by getting to know other cultures, other people, other points of view. And these different points of view and cultures each have wisdom in them, and that we can learn and benefit from them. We have different lifestyles. Just people that attend this group have different lifestyles, and that we can learn by observing and listening to other people, that there are different racial characteristics, body characteristics, gender identities, and a whole host of other things that we can all learn from by listening to other people. And these differences do not make people less equal. Again, we're all human, and it is humans that decide that some people are equal and other people are not equal, and we can choose to be on the side of viewing all people as equal. It's difficult. We're going to get into that more here. Now, the next section here is the marketing of equality. And this is a very interesting section here, that while equality may appeal to people around the world, most people don't feel equal. And that very few people act like they are equal. It's very common to act like you are, shall we say, more equal to other people, or that you're not, there's something fundamentally flawed in you and you're not as good as other people. Both are a form of arrogance, but definitely personal and social inequality persist. But again, they are not natural, they're imposed. So the real basis of equality is internal. However, because of globalism and consumerism, we have, from the outside, been led in the opposite direction. That from the viewpoint of businesses that have something to sell, equality is measured in possessions, how you look, the kind of lifestyle that you lead, and so forth. And that the internet and advertising is worldwide nowadays. That I remember being in Nepal, and you would see kids on their way to school, and they'd have cell phones. And if you've got a cell phone, you've got the internet. They might not have paid much for that cell phone, but they had a cell phone. And so much of advertising is done in terms of comparisons. And when the ad comes up, you seem to have the short end of the stick. I can tell you this, that I do Facebook. I don't do all these other uh, uh, forms of social media that the younger people do. But even on my Facebook, when I get on there, or YouTube, this would be another example. They're constantly, you're being bombarded with ads that are taking you someplace or another. And if you click on one of the ads, then more ads or sites related to that one that you clicked on come up. And pretty soon you're down a rabbit hole where you just keep getting more and more suggestions of the same old, same old. Uh, Now, I'm 78 years old and I'm a male, and on YouTube, I'm constantly getting, uh, 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 they're not even identified as ads for lonely women, Asian women, Hispanic women, Ukrainian women, and so forth. And they're all looking very young and very good, but they want old men. And I've never clicked on one, but I know if I clicked on one, then 10 more sites would come up like that. Well, I'm just saying you got to be careful. And it just takes you in some very negative places. This is just an example of one thing. If you would go on, let's just say shopping, jewelry. I don't know why, but I also will get ads for lipstick for older women. I don't know if they want me to buy the lipstick. They think that, I don't know. Again, I don't click on those either. Anyway, you're bombarded with all these things that make you feel that you're lacking something. And it's so easy to think that we need a lifestyle that has been constructed by corporations, social media, and so forth. And all of this comparison, it leaves you feeling empty. It makes you feeling that you need something, that your old cell phone, well, you don't even understand how to work all the features, that it's obsolete and you need a new cell phone, that you need new clothes, you need a new car, you need a better vacation, you need concert tickets, and on and on and on. And it's this poverty mentality. And I'm trying not to get too negative, but the important thing is we need to be aware of this and try to avoid being swayed or influenced too much by all of this that we are exposed to. So then the next section is called, What is Development? Really, with a question mark after it. And this one is just a series of questions, really, a little bit of explanation in between the questions. The first thing I did is I went to Google to get exactly what was third world countries, second world countries, and first world countries. Galwan Karmapa didn't exactly talk about these, but this is what Google came up with. First world countries are countries that are aligned with the US and other developed countries. So this would be Europe, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Second world countries are the Russian Federation, China, Vietnam, Cuba. And there might be one or two others, but those were the main ones for the second world, the communist countries. And then the third world countries were the less developed countries. And of course, the less developed countries are viewed as backward, and their voices are not as important as first world countries because they don't know as much as we do. So the problem with this is that it equates modern development with progress and being better. And Karmapa talks about his lifestyle in Tibet as a child. It, of course, is viewed as backward. The Chinese government views it as backward too, and they're trying to modernize and develop the Tibetan plateau. But without electricity, without appliances, he said there wasn't even anything made out of plastic. Yet they were happy. They were content with what they had, and there was a lot of spiritual development under those conditions. So basically, what does developing wisely mean? So he has a number of different possibilities under this. It could be development to include goals such as human rights, environmental conservation, education, or does development mean the backward sectors find new opportunities to do menial jobs for low pay so you can buy more consumer goods and then have the marks of success and advancement. And this is, of course, what we see a lot of parts of the world. He'll talk about Bangladesh later on. So another possible form of development is developing better access for human beings to the conditions for happiness and well-being, lasting happiness and lasting well-being. And then the fourth one here is developing the inner conditions for growth as a human being. From there, he has three other things here that are important to think about. One is everyone has equal access to beneficial advancements and resources. The second point is, do they preserve their cultural identity? Or do these groups have to take on a Western cultural identity? Or in the case of the Tibetans, the Chinese government is trying to turn them into Chinese culturally. I remember this was way back in 1999. I attended with a group from KTD, led by Barter Tulku Rinpoche. We attended a dinner that was planned, this was in Beijing, by the government agency in charge of Tibetan Buddhism. And they had a group of Tibetan women that did traditional Tibetan, and I say traditional in quotes, Tibetan dancing and singing. And one of the songs was, "The Tibetans are Chinese too." The idea is that they want to erase the Tibetans as an individual cultural group. even though physically they are very different from the Chinese and easily recognized as being different from the Chinese. And you can see this happening in lots of parts of the world. Karmapa talks about a recent discovery of a Native American tribe in the Amazon that had no contact with Westerners. And now there's contact. Well, what do you do? What is the best way to treat this new group of people? And that brings the third question is, well, do these people need access to Western medical treatment? What about education? There can be benefits from both. And of course, they may want to, for instance, have treatment for Western diseases that they could be very susceptible to, vaccinations and so forth. And so these require really a lot of thought about the benefits and the downside of contact with these people and what is in their best interests. There's actually been a lot of anthropology that has investigated how these primitive groups that were native, that had no contact with the West, what happened to them as their contact with the West deepened and the effect that it had. So these are really issues that get very complicated. The Karmapa has this quote: "There should be a global conversation, and space should be made for the voices of those who do not exemplify the global ideals of material development." So he finishes this section with two questions. How can we establish social equality without erasing diversity? And how can we embrace our differences with mutual respect and harmony? The next section is difference is not deficiency. So equality and sameness are different. I like that. Equality and sameness are different. Sounds like an oxymoron, but that's the point. So he then gets into the beauty industry, where it sells an image that all women are supposed to look a similar way, that the makeup can make you look a certain way, dieting, yoga, cosmetic surgery, and on and on and on. This can be a big problem, and of course, it's a huge moneymaker. And I find this interesting, and I probably shouldn't even go into this, but I'm going to go into it. I'm a man. What do I know about this? But I'm just going to stick my head out there, my neck out there, and starting with what Karmapa says is that sexism is that looks are a key to a woman's success. That if she looks a certain way, that will lead to success. And if not, then it will not lead to success. And this, of course, is comparing yourself with other people or encouraging other people to compare themselves with other people, with what other people have, to act like other people, to look like other people. Sameness is just conformity. And a little later, he talks about the Korean women wanting to look like this particular, I think it was a singer. I'll get into this in a later chapter. But anyway, there is so much that is done to try to have a certain look. And What comes to my mind, and again, I probably shouldn't say anything about this, but I've been reading a few editorials about how 2023 was the year of the woman of Taylor Swift, the Barbie movie, and a few other things like that. And what little I know about this, I got out of it was that women are doing more and more things with other women and aren't so concerned about what men think of them. And it's leaving men in kind of a tough position because the women aren't as interested in them. Anyway, the next section is the value of diversity. We all know that biodiversity is beneficial and valuable. And human diversity is also because of interdependence, to appreciate other people, other ways of doing things. And it can lead us to seeing the beauty of other ways of doing things. Human diversity contributes to the strength and the health of society, that there's more than one way to do things, that there are other ways to do things. We all are slightly different in terms of our emotional responses, the conditions that we grew up with, the conditions that we're living with at the present time. One way or another, there's going to be diversity, even if we want to be like everybody else. It can't be any other way. Religion is perhaps a difficult part of diversity, that there, a lot of times people feel that their religion or their version of their religion is the true religion. While this can be very difficult, religious diversity is bound to occur. It just can't be any other way because there are different human beings and different ways of looking at the same thing. And it is historical and cultural conditions that give rise to different religious institutions, practices, doctrines, and so forth. Human beings are different, human societies are different, and one form of religion in one society might not make all that much sense in another society. In the United States, there are so many different forms of Christianity. I was a chaplain at a Wisconsin state prison, and part of my job was to bring in religious volunteers. And in terms of Christianity, first of all, we had the Catholic Church. Then there's the Greek Orthodox. And even within the Catholic Church, there was a splinter of the Catholic Church that was very, very conservative, that actually had a branch located not that far from this prison that I worked at. I think it was since the Second Vatican Council where they allowed chanting in English instead of Latin, that they split off at that time. And they wanted to send in, and then they would do a service and tell the Catholic inmates that the way they've been doing it were wrong and yada yada. And then you would get to the Protestants, and it was the same thing. You had some that were very conservative, and then you had the Mennonites come in. Then we had born again, the Lutherans and the Methodists, and just everything. And it could get very confusing for the inmate if they had to listen to all these different ones because they were contradictory. Anyway, the point is that we can learn to accept these differences, and we don't have to fight them or be against them. They all have a certain wisdom behind them. And just realize that fighting over religion is probably as old as there's been religion, but there's no point in it, that we can work together and accept the differences. There are many, many different spiritual paths. Why not work together rather than fighting each other? Thinking that I am right and they are wrong is not a healthy approach. I remember Rinpoche saying this, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche saying this once, that there are other powerful spiritual paths, but there are none that are more powerful than Tibetan Buddhism. That was about as far as he would go in terms of judging other spiritual paths. And Tai Situ Rinpoche said something to the effect of that there cannot be 2, 3, or 4 ultimate destinations. There can only be one ultimate destination. And so it's a matter of accepting these other religions, and you don't have to accept when they say that they are right and you are wrong. These can be dealt with in a better way. That's where we need to be the ones to learn how to work with more wisdom with religions that do not agree with the way we are practicing our spirituality. So we need to recognize that all humans wish to be free, they want to avoid suffering, they want to be happy, and that we have all of this in common, and that this is, in a way, this shared root that all religions have. And if we can see them as fundamentally equal and respect this value of diversity, then we're getting to look at the branches and see the roots are in the same place. And again, from my experience as a prison chaplain, a person that is an alcoholic or a drug addict that's in a very, very poor emotional place, they need something that is very simple. They do not need a complicated religion. They need something that really they can understand at a simple level. This is what you do. It's you believe, you have faith in these teachings, and the teachings are very, very simple. And you admit that you are a sinner and you're going to da 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 da. I had some very interesting experiences in the prison. Anyway, the next section is a century to share. Karmapa says the 21st century is the communication age. We have access to the whole world. And in my words, the jury is still out on how this will affect us and the global community. But whatever, there's plenty of sharing going on nowadays. And because of interdependence, when they're sharing, both parties are impacted and influenced. It can be very subtle level, or it can be on a very obvious level. It can be positive, negative, can be mixed. And history is full of examples in the past of what happens when cultures come in contact with each other. Some of them aren't so good. We want to avoid mistakes that have been made in the past, which frequently has been that the ones that are more powerful, the ones with the guns, are considered superior, and the ones without the guns are considered inferior, or the ones with the bigger guns are superior. Quote, this means learning to truly value one another and to recognize diversity as highly productive and beneficial. He goes on to say that this means that religious traditions and cultural practices are not consumer items. I found this quite interesting. Consumer items to be acquired and consumed. Spiritual materialism, he brings up that phrase. And what this means is using spirituality or religion to prop up your own ego. It would be Chogyam Trungpa wrote a whole book on spiritual materialism. And an example that he would use, or that he did use, is spending a summer in Japan at a Zen monastery and just having a fantastic time. And then you go back home and you tell everybody just what a fantastic time you had. Now, the question is, did you have any personal development? Did you learn anything, or did you just have a fantastic time doing the exotic things in Japan at a Zen monastery? So we have to be careful. The whole world has to be careful that we don't use cultures and religions to prop up our own ego and become more of an egomaniac. There's also cultural appropriation, where a person or a group will take up something from another group and transform it into something that it is very different. I am trying to think, I don't know if it was last year or the year before. I think it was Kim Kardashian that designed a particular piece of clothing and called it a kimono. And there was a lot of pushback from Japanese women because it had nothing to do with the kimono. It had to do a lot with Kim. And I think on the social platforms, it was Kim, oh no. And I think she finally did drop that line. But there can be a lot of cultural appropriation, and it's not treating the other as equal. It's just something to be used, something to be consumed. It's spiritual materialism in a different form. So we need to be opening up to the new and the unfamiliar, not using it for our own egotistical purposes. We need to be discovering about other people, not building walls. And having these exchanges with other means the possibility of change, whereas spiritual materialism is solidifying things. There's no possible change that could have happened. You're just using it to solidify and build walls. So he defines a meaningful exchange as something that challenges us at some level. And I find this interesting. He says, if we can't value another's view, at least we can understand it, that it has a reason and a purpose, and to at least give it some respect. The basic reason for valuing diversity is common sense, common values. We have common needs and aspirations. And to again look at our basic equality and that these differences are really minor compared to what we have in common. This is a continuing theme in this. Actually, the whole book is that we make little things into big things, and we make what's really basic to us all into something very little. So we're totally over focusing on the unimportant and under focusing on what is important and basic. The next is the consequence of ignorance. As far as I'm concerned, he gets right to the heart of this at the beginning of the section, that ignorance of others leaves space. And this space is filled with projections and assumptions. Our own projections, our own assumptions. It's our imagination, it's our creation. On the other hand, humility leaves space for us to learn about other people. So it's very important to have some humility and be open to learning. We want to avoid stereotypes of media images. And it's very easy to think that you know the other person or the other group very well, when in actuality, you know almost nothing. It's very good to be curious. It's important to be curious. We want to avoid seeing one little aspect of a person and thinking that that defines them for good or bad. People are complex. We are complex. And whoever we are interacting with, they are complex too. He continues to talk about how we will project qualities of false reality on other people. There may be a hint that a person is a certain way, and then all of a sudden we have this large fantasy about what that means. He talks about names and where names come from and how your name is given to you at the time of birth, or maybe even before you were born. Nowadays, they will know the sex of a baby before the baby is born. So he uses the name Jack. He said if I used a Tibetan name, no one would be able to relate to that, because he was talking to Western American students. So he used the word Jack. Jack is just a bunch of letters, and that Jack is given to Jack as a name by his parents, and you begin to identify that is who I am. I am Jack, and if people talk well about Jack, you feel good, and if they talk badly about Jack, Jack feels bad. So ignorance here is failing to distinguish between labels, concepts, thoughts, and the actual thing. He says it may look intelligent, but it's really not. It's ignorant. And this led my mind to immediately go to the example that I have used, which is the painting, the surrealistic painting of a pipe, which says on it underneath in French, "This is not a pipe." And the artist that did that was trying to make a point. This is a picture of a pipe. In his own words, you cannot fill it and smoke it. If it was a pipe, you could fill it with tobacco and you could smoke it. But you can't do that with a picture. But of course, You see a picture of a pipe and you say, this is a pipe. And then on there was the word pipe. And the word pipe you cannot fill with tobacco and smoke. So it's just letters. And then the thought pipe, you can't fill that with tobacco and smoke either. Yet we get all bent out of shape with words that are just letters that have no meaning. So this is what ignorance is about. We see these things, we assume about them, we put meaning on them, we project on them, and we don't see what's actually happening. Quote, we focus on fictions we ourselves have written and think we are reading the truth. We have to be very careful what we are projecting on other people, other cultures, other viewpoints, and so forth. It can become very dangerous when we apply this to a whole group of people or a culture. After the 9/11, September 11th attack on the World Trade Center, suddenly all Muslims were terrorists in this country to many people, and fear was rampant. And then it got focused on immigrants. Lately, immigrants have been looked at by many Americans as being the enemy, as terrorists, as, pardon me for saying this, but polluting our blood. And all of this is ignorance. It's interesting, Karmapa points out that America is supposed to be the land of the free. But when you have the wrong clothes on, suddenly there's no freedom. And it could be that you've got a MAGA hat on, and suddenly you're not supposed to be a supporter of Trump, that's wrong. So from the liberal point of view, sometimes that freedom has very limited application. If you're a supporter of Trump, then you don't deserve freedom of wearing what you want to. You're the enemy, and vice versa. If you have a slogan that is in favor of immigration or who knows what else, then you're the enemy. So Karmapa says that there's just so much fear, anger, hate, and distrust in the world today. And we need to do something about that. We need to recognize this. We need to keep an open mind and avoid shutting down our mind when it comes to people that are different than us, have different opinions from us, and so forth. So he continues here by saying that it seems that in the United States, the dominant, the powerful group wears suits. And I immediately thought of this new dress code in Congress where you can't wear shorts like Fetterman did. And Karmapa goes on and says, if you don't wear what the powerful group wears, then you are less powerful and not as equal. And I know they've been talking about tightening up the dress code for women in Congress too. It's very important what women wear when you're having men making these decisions. I'm not going to go into that anymore, but I'm just bringing this up as something to think about. So we cling to our judgments and our impressions because they are our own, and we think that we are right. We think that we are the Supreme Court in terms of what is fair, what is not fair, what is right, what is wrong. And all of this is just more arrogance. And what we feel appearances must be are what is right, and what other people think is not necessarily right, especially if it disagrees with us. And the important thing is that differences are inevitable and we can learn to accept differences. So humility is to let us see through the eyes of another person